Big 12 or go home. It's championship week. We're here. We made it through the whole season. Pulled 12 games. Brought you coverage you can count on here. Go Big 12 or go big home. I'm Brandon Shanahan. Joined as always by Iowa broadcasting legend Drew Russell. Drew, boy, what a weekend.
What a weekend. It was just late August. I'm telling you, 2 weeks ago. I don't know how on earth we're, into the month of December pretty much now. And here we are, championship weekend. We've got our matchup with Texas, Oklahoma State, which that path for both teams, especially Oklahoma State this last weekend, was pretty interesting, but they made it. And we've got a lot to discuss, not just with the Big 12, but just the general aspect of college football as we get into one of the funnest weeks of the year with championship week. And obviously we'll find out next time we record, we'll have our playoff teams, which is very exciting.
Yeah, I got to say, as far as like a conference championship weekend goes, I'm pretty excited. I feel like last year we got real gypped with a bunch of stinkers and a bunch of games that didn't matter, with Michigan beating up on, I don't even know who they're, Purdue maybe. And then Georgia and LSU was never competitive. Out west in the Big 12 were really good games with USC and Utah. That one mattered. TCU, Kansas State, very good game, went overtime, didn't matter. Definitely the Big 10 didn't matter. Definitely the SEC didn't matter. But this year feels very consequential, all of those games.
Yes.
You have, two juggernauts in Alabama and Georgia going at it. You get two also very prime playoff contenders in Washington and Oregon. Getting a part 2 of that is just, that's outstanding stuff. You get the potential, upset spoiler kind of situation in the Big 12. Is Texas going to slip up? Are they back? And then you get to watch Michigan just kick the snot out of Iowa. It's already been 64 days since Iowa's been shut out, so they're probably due. So
you think that's a done deal? You don't think Iowa competes at all? I've seen the line. I mean, Michigan's a big favorite, but you don't think Iowa can keep it? I'll say keep it within 10 going into the fourth.
That would make me cry. Of course, I got my personal allegiances on. I don't want them to have any happy feelings. It's going to be the last time we ever see Iowa win a Big Ten championship, so I guess we could kind of celebrate that. But yeah, I definitely, and I think that very much matters on what Michigan wants to do. If they want to win this game by 84 points, they can win this game by 84 points. Make no mistake about it.
Yeah,
I have a feeling they don't care about winning 80 by 84 points. Care about getting in, getting out, staying healthy, not putting too much on tape if you can avoid it.
Yeah.
So I think for that reason, it probably will be pretty closer than we probably should. Iowa minus or plus 24 or so is probably a good bet. It's a lot of points. But also, yeah, I'm rooting for them to run it up for sure. But that's just my own animosity.
That's fair. So you look at all the championship games this weekend, and we're going to obviously dig into the most, Texas, Oklahoma State. So Texas wins, they're 12-1, and they're going to believe they have a case for the college football playoff. It's a fair case. Their only loss is a neutral site game against a hated rival in the last 10 seconds. But this is a logjam at the top when you look at Georgia undefeated, Florida State's undefeated, Michigan's undefeated, Washington's undefeated. And then you have an Alabama team with 1 loss, Oregon with 1 loss. Then you have Texas, and those are, so they've got to find a way to leapfrog. And even Ohio State's got 1 loss, but we'll say they're out for right now since they're not playing this weekend. I don't know if they have a route back in, but the question is, is there a way that Texas can make it? Because I don't know if it's there right now. What are the circumstances that would have to happen for them to make it? And we talked about last week where, let's say Alabama beats Georgia this weekend, and Alabama would make the college football playoff. I don't think anybody can debate that at 12-1 in an SEC championship. Maybe we can, but I'll say no. Are they going to take a 1-loss Georgia team or a 1-loss Texas team? I would think they'd go Georgia. Like I don't know though, Brandon. Like this is a tough situation here. Where is there a route where Texas can play in this thing?
I do think that there is a route. It's tough to kind of piece it together because of how awful I think the college football playoff committee is, because they keep telling us one thing and then doing other things. First of all, they're not even doing those things well. Tennessee being ranked and Utah not being ranked is exactly what you need to know. Tennessee's not good.
Mm-hmm.
Utah is. It is what it is. I don't know if you remember first game of the season, Utah had a quarterback competition against Florida. They're like,
Yep.
we're so in control of this game. We're gonna see if we can find a quarterback here, like a scrimmage. They were treating that game like a scrimmage, and that team beat Tennessee by 2 touchdowns. So I just want to throw that out there. Not bitter about
That's
it at
true.
all, but so aside from that, they keep telling us that we want the 4 best teams, which by the way, it's never been
Right.
that. And
It's
frankly,
true.
it shouldn't be, but they keep saying it, and then they keep doing things like elevating Florida State, who has lost their Heisman caliber quarterback. That's not nothing.
Yeah.
They're if you take away their resume and you really want to make a case for the 4 best teams, Florida
Yep.
State with their backup quarterback's not a top 4 team. Now, granted, they should be in
Agreed.
there because they've earned it. They deserve to be there. And that's fine. I don't know why they don't say that. So
Right.
it's tough to really get a gauge on where they're going at. And they also do this thing where they like to swish things around at the last second, especially with the conference championship games. Like in that first year with TCU, if I'm not mistaken, they were in the top 4 going to the conference championship weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Just spanked Iowa State for their last game of the year, claimed their
Right.
Big 12 championship game, and then got demoted after the conference championship game.
Right.
Um, so it's really tough to really gauge where they're going. The path for Texas, probably what the path should be for Texas, is if Florida State's out, then Texas gets elevated to that 4 slot. Especially if because
So
in that situation, I think that the Pac-12 is an elimination game. So either Oregon or Washington stays ahead of them, and then of course Georgia and Michigan control their own destiny. So then you get Georgia, Michigan, Pac-12, and Texas.
mhm.
I think that should be the path. I have a hunch that if Alabama wins, that won't be the path, but we'll
Right.
see.
I think that's the ultimate X factor because if Georgia wins, that cleans up quite a bit. Where,
Yeah,
if you're, I mean, if I'm Texas, I'm supporting Georgia, no questions, because undefeated and Alabama have 2 losses, they're out. That Pac-12 game is an interesting one to me because I could envision a scenario where if Oregon wins over Washington, but there's some weird shenanigans that they keep the Pac-12 out somehow. Because I think if Washington loses, Brandon, I think they're done. I don't
I
see a
think so.
scenario where even though them and Oregon would have split the season series, they're done. Like, no
Yeah,
one's going to take that seriously. And on paper, I would say Oregon should jump and get that opportunity to potentially play. But would that committee view the same thing? And Florida State's the interesting X factor because, they played Florida last week. They didn't look great for a lot of that game. And give them credit. They win at a rival's place. That's not an easy thing to do. No one's debating that. But they don't look, they're not the same since the Travis injury. No
yeah.
one's also going to fight that. But if you're the college football committee, can you keep a 13-0 team out? And Florida State, if I'm a Florida State fan, I would gripe like crazy if you kept my team out at 13-0. Like, what else do you want us to do? We played an SEC team. We beat LSU. Like, we killed them. So it's an interesting deal, Brandon. And there are still a lot of scenarios that can play out. But I guarantee, that college football committee, I'm sure they're praying, and I don't think they'll get it. But I'm sure they're hoping that somehow Louisville can upset Florida State, make their life a little bit easier. Because Florida State, I don't think is a top 4 team right now, even if they win. But they'd have to put them in. I feel bad for them if they didn't, to be brutally honest.
Yeah, and then I also look back because I think you could have made a very similar case back when the playoffs started with Ohio State losing their top two quarterbacks.
Hmm.
And the playoff committee, that's the team who they elevated above that really, really good TCU team. And it feels different because there's still a lot more mess at the top where you're not splitting hairs between a non-conference champion and a conference champion, where you probably have to pick between a couple of different conference champions for that last spot. So it's different, but I would hope that the committee would be like, hey, this team deserved to go to the playoff. They went 12-1. They won the Big 10 championship game. Yeah, their QB1 and QB2 went down. They're probably not as good without those, but this is what we asked. They did exactly what we asked them to do. Go out,
Right.
win all your conference games, win your conference championship game, and we'll get you covered at the end of it. I hope that's the path that they take because it, especially as a Big 12 homer, knowing how the optics are going to go here shortly. If
Hmm.
they're going to do this to a team like Florida State, where you could go 13-0 and miss the playoff, granted, 4 versus 12 teams can be very different. But
Right. Yeah.
if you don't respect a perfect season, then I think it narrows the options for the Big 12 and it sets a really bad precedent, a very slippery slope. Because then also, well,
Hmm.
then when do you draw the line at what injuries matter? Like if Ohio State had won, but Marvin Harrison Jr. gets hurt, they're not the same team. So now they should get demoted because they have that. Or what if it's like
Yep.
a left tackle and you're like, well, that's a big vulnerability. That's one of the most valuable positions on the field, and now we're going to keep you out.
Yep.
They wait for the injury report to come out before releasing the rankings? It's just it feels very slippery, and I would. Granted, I don't think that Florida State is a top four team, and I think you could even make the case it's kind of sketchy with Jordan Travis in there,
Hmm.
but they've earned it. That team has earned it. That coaching staff has earned it.
Right.
They've done everything that they've done, and as you said, I talk a lot about how the SEC plays their 8 conference games and they're soft, and the
Hmm.
Florida State has an 8 game schedule, and they scheduled LSU in Florida,
Yeah.
and so that's not nothing.
Yep.
They literally have done everything the playoff committee would ask a team to do: be
Yeah.
perfect, schedule non-conference games that are tough, win
Yep.
those,
Yeah.
still have to be perfect, and they did it. So that to me feels like it should take precedent over this phony baloney concept that should be the 4 best teams. That the games have to matter.
They have to matter. Not to mention, I've talked about this before. I absolutely hate that non-conference games are picked 10 to 15 years before they're played.
Yeah.
Like that a series like, hey, in 2033 and 2034, we're going to be matching up with this team. Who knows where both of those programs will be at that point? That's 10 years away. And, like for Florida State, they didn't know that Florida's traditionally a pretty good team. They didn't know they would be kind of in this scenario. They don't know where LSU is going to be. They've tried, and that does matter. But what's interesting, Brandon, I'm looking just at the matchups that involve playoff teams, and I'm going to base this purely off of the Vegas lines if they were to play as true in terms of where that line is. Oregon, Washington. Oregon's a 9.5 point favorite,
It's a
which
lot
is
of points.
significant. It is. Texas is a 15.5 point favorite. Georgia's a 5.5 point favorite. Michigan 21.5. And then Florida State's only a 2.5 point favorite over Louisville as of right now. That's a Louisville team that just lost to Kentucky last week. So let's say everything plays out based on that line itself. And I know that it's college football, so I guarantee it won't. But let's say Oregon takes out Washington. Texas wins, Georgia wins, Michigan, Florida State. You would have a scenario where pretty much, you'd have 5 teams pretty much that I feel would be claiming for 4 spots.
Hmm.
Where you'd have Georgia undefeated, no one would debate that.
Yep.
Michigan undefeated, no one would debate that. And then Florida State would be undefeated. I don't think you can debate that. And then it comes down to which one lost conference champion do you pick, Texas or Oregon? And I think they keep the Pac-12 out. Actually, I think they pick Texas. Or do you think they would say, you know what, Oregon beat a good Washington team previously undefeated, or they sneak in at 4?
I think that they would sneak in. I think the path in that scenario for Texas would be a lot cleaner if in this most recent rankings, Texas was ranked ahead of Oregon. I
Right.
don't really think there's a way that Texas can jump Oregon if Oregon wins. Because then
Right.
you also look at it, well, now Oregon, depending on how far Washington falls, almost certainly if Alabama loses to Georgia, Oregon's going to have the better win in Washington, and they're
Mm-hmm.
going to have the better loss also in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you make the claim that now they beat every team on their schedule. I would make the case that they've gotten significantly better since that loss to Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And you could probably say the same for Texas since their loss to Oklahoma. They've really not struggled much. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I would have a hard time anticipating Texas jumping Oregon
Yeah.
in that manner. Um,
Do
because
you
yeah,
think for Texas to make it, Florida State has to lose no matter what?
what scenario has to happen for Texas? So and Joel Klatt threw this out,
Okay.
and I mentioned this earlier because this is how it should be.
Okay.
If say Florida State wins, they're in. Pac-12 winner, they're in. Michigan wins, they're playing a JV team, they're in. So then you have that a 4th spot, and then if Alabama beats Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
Texas should be in over Alabama. They played head to head. You've seen these two teams on the same field. Texas won by multiple scores in Tuscaloosa.
Mm-hmm.
That should take precedent. Now, I have a feeling that that's not how it's going to be. The committee is
Mm-hmm.
going to jump Texas with Alabama, claim resume, claim they've gotten better, blah 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 blah. So I think that's how it would pan out. But
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I think that's the nightmare scenario for the committee. It's having
Is
to make
that
that call because then,
I
and
agree.
like I hinted earlier, that's such a shitty precedent where it's like, okay, well, can, we want you to schedule non-conference opponents that are tough, and we want you to beat them, and then it doesn't matter
Right.
because they
Right.
played.
Well, it's like Big 12 conference member Cincinnati when they're
Yeah,
in the AAC. They go undefeated. Not enough. They had to go undefeated again the next year in the regular season just to
yeah,
get they got their attention. Like pretty much they're like, well, you got to be undefeated for 2 years, then you can make it. And I feel like that's what it takes sometimes is you have to be on the radar preseason to make it,
yeah,
unless it's wild circumstances.
yeah. It's just it feels so shitty to have these two teams play. But I mean, I guess you could also make the case. Well, now teams aren't going to schedule because the 12-0 Alabama team gets in over Texas,
Yeah,
no doubt. But because they decided to schedule them and lost, but you gotta reward the winner of that game.
I agree.
That's why the
Yep,
games have to matter.
I agree with that. And that's the question because 2-loss Alabama, no one's going to debate. Texas is
Yeah,
better, but what if it is a 1-loss Alabama SEC
yeah,
champion? Because I
that's
think Georgia, because
right.
then they'll compare Georgia to Texas, and that'll be the big question.
Yeah,
Which that would be an interesting one in its own debate as well. Um, and those are both national. Like Texas is a national brand.
mm,
It's not like that's. If it was future Big 12 member Arizona, who's had a great year, kudos to them on the
yeah. Go
9-win
Cats.
season. Yeah, go Cats. But let's say it's Arizona for some reason, and they're in the same situation. I don't think I would personally even consider them to make it, even if they won a hypothetical Big 12 championship. I'm like, Georgia's the bigger national brand. They're going to pick Georgia. Doesn't matter. But Texas is not a small brand. Texas is a huge brand. And that's like, I do think brands have kind of mattered in this playoff era. Clearly, they want ratings, they want TV revenue. It's a for-profit sport. This would have been a good year. I know last week I kind of railed on the 12-team playoff a little bit, but this would be a pretty decent year to have as long as the conference champion got the bye, no matter what. This would be a pretty good year for a 12-team playoff. I feel it'd be actually kind of viable this year, to be honest.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And the it's so funny because on my Twitter feed all day today, it's been people who are super stoked and think um that this 12 team playoff is a disaster. And then another folks are just so excited. It doesn't feel
I
like
know.
that there's a whole lot of middle ground, and they're so passionate on each end here. But yeah, like I said, I think this is the perfect way to do it. As I'm trying to pull it up without having to. Let me see here. So yeah, let's because my thing is, and the one argument that you'd have against it is that it possibly narrows out the regular season, but I don't think so because Georgia and Alabama are playing. If Georgia loses, well, then they go play Missouri. You don't want to go play Missouri. You want
Right.
to be on the couch watching film, getting rest.
Right.
If you're, Washington, yeah, you probably still get in with uh with a loss against Oregon, but you don't want to play any of these teams, even if you get lucky and draw Tulane. None of these teams you want to play for your season. So it incentivizes conference championship games for the favorite, as we talked about, but also now teams like Oklahoma State, who have had these real rocky seasons,
Mm-hmm.
haven't been able to. They had a rough start. They've come
Mm-hmm.
back. They stumbled late. They have a chance to make the playoff. How fucking
Right.
crazy is that? Louisville, the first year head coach, 10-2. They're humming. All they have to do is beat Florida State with their backup quarterback. They're in the playoff. That's beautiful. I don't know.
Agreed.
I,
Yeah.
I hate there's an argument against it because this is awesome. This is awesome. This is
Like this,
great.
I would be pretty hyped for this. Like, and again, I know what I said last week, but like in the span of a week, Brandon Shanahan, I have gone from I don't know, let's keep the tradition, and now I'm like, you know what, the NCAA tournament as well because of its predictableness with the 68 team field. And I'm kind of all in on this 12 team deal if they can find the correct format, and I think they will. No, they probably won't, but on paper, this is incredible. I would love to see Penn State go visit Austin.
Yeah.
That'd be a weird game. Like Austin or Texas should win, but like Penn State's defense is pretty nasty. They can't score worth a lick, but like I think they could give them some fits. Lane Kiffin going to Ohio State would be hilarious.
Outstanding.
That would be fun. Like in middle of December, see Ole Miss go to Columbus would be pretty funny. I mean, Mizzou, like you meant, I hate Mizzou, but they're playing quality football. I'm guessing Bama wouldn't want to see them.
Yeah, a team like Missouri doesn't have to be perfect
Right.
to get into to play for a national championship.
Right. They've lost twice. Like they deserve to play on the road, but like, I've kind of come around. Like, does it water down the regular season a little bit?
No.
Eh, Honest to God, I was like last week. I was telling you, Brandon. I was like, yes, it does. And now I'm like, maybe a little bit, but like, you still have to win 10 games to make the college football playoff.
Yeah.
You still have to have like double figure wins to be considered. And some teams just do it in their sleep. That's what's infuriating to a lot of teams. Georgia can win 10 games sleepwalking through the season. They've sleptwalked through a good chunk this year. They're 12-0 and good shot they're 13-0 after this weekend. Like, it's not easy to win 10 games in college football. Just certain programs, because they recruit well, they have big fan bases, etc. It's just the standard. Ohio State, Ryan Day's had a great year. That's another great Ohio State team. They won 11-1. Not good enough. They lost to Michigan. Like there's just different, but you have to win 10 games still to make it in this new era of college football. And that's not easy.
No.
It's not easy to win 10 games. I don't care the conference. I don't care. It's not easy to win 10 games.
It's a lot of games.
It's a lot of games. So
Yeah, and
I
then
don't know.
looking back at this last week of college football, you look at it and like there's so many more teams that are in it. Like a Penn State, if they drop that game last week, they're all of a sudden not going to the playoff. That's a big
Right.
deal. Same thing with Missouri playing Tennessee a couple weeks ago. If they drop that game, now they didn't drop it because Tennessee stinks.
Right.
then yeah, they're not in it. Their season's ruined. Where this year is kind of like, well, yeah, it'd be nice to get to like a better bowl game and to get to 10 wins.
Right.
That's pretty cool. But I mean, that's not as tangible. And then a team like Missouri can now take their playoff appearance, that bright spot on
Hmm.
national television where they're playing among
Yep.
the best teams in the country, use that momentum into the recruiting season, into the
Right.
transfer portal season, and really try to build something special and take advantage of that. Where a 10-win season is great, but it's not moving the needle as much as it should.
That's a great point, Brandon. You're dead right, because the United States sports culture, regular season matters, but it's what you do in the postseason. That's what people care about in this country. That's not necessarily the case in other countries. You go over to Europe, you watch soccer over there, they don't have postseason play for those soccer leagues. What you do in the regular season, how you finish in the regular season, that's like if you finish first regular season, you're the champ. There is no, hey, you got to now play in a champion, like a tournament, and you're the one seed. That doesn't exist. What's interesting, I think, just, at that bracket, I mean, that's a great point. Like, for the like Ohio State, Michigan last Saturday wouldn't have had maybe as much significance, but it's still a rivalry. So I think that it's just the bragging rights no matter what. So I think the significance would have stayed there for the most part, even with a 12-team playoff. But that was something I read that, people were saying, well, that's the problem with this new 12-team playoff. That game is pretty much a de facto elimination, or it wouldn't be an elimination game because both teams would make it no matter what. But I view it as somebody's getting a bye. Somebody's going to that's a huge deal. Like
you see teams in the NFL, they'll keep their starters out weeks 18 now.
Right.
If they can be in the hunt for a home field advantage or that one bye they get now. That's so important.
Fan bases will stay more engaged as well because, again, the United States is a postseason country. We like what happens in the postseason. And you look at certain teams that are, if they're ranked between 10 and 15, or heck, even 15 to 20, 3-4 weeks left in the regular season, they're thinking, maybe we've lost once or twice, but if we get hot, make a conference championship game, win our conference championship, like, we're in this thing.
Yeah.
We're in it. It's not a, hey, congrats, you're going to, the Sugar Bowl. And I crack up at people who say, man, those were the days back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when that's how college football should be, is, just a limited amount of bowl games, all that. It was great back in the day. It was perfect for the back in the day.
Yeah, when you had
this isn't back in the day. When you only had 3 channels, it was great. It made a lot of sense. This isn't back in the day anymore. This is the style we created. Let's make it fun. And I think I've legit done a 180 in 7 days on it.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I really have. Because I'm like, all of a sudden, I'm like, you know what? Let's go 12. More teams are going to care. You can still make those top spots pretty freaking worthwhile. More football as well, more meaningful football, outside of the gamblers and sickos that want to watch, those December bowls. And I know a few of them, Brandon, myself included here and there. Who doesn't love the Cheez-It Bowl?
Let's go.
But seriously, 12-team playoff this year would be great. It's going to be, I'm sure, great in future years as well. But that's not the scenario we're playing with right now. We're at 4 teams, and we're going to see how it pans out this weekend.
Yeah, and I'll also throw this out there to you, because I think the best argument for keeping the playoff at 4 teams, as you look at that Michigan-Ohio State game, it's got 19 million viewers this year, where they both would make the playoff if it was 12 teams for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about how beneficial that bye is and whatnot. What happened last year? They had 15 million people watch that game. It was the most hyped football game of the entire season, and then they both made the playoff anyways.
Great point. Wonderful point.
We're already there, and I think, that high intensity regular season games may get diminished a little bit, but that is far outweighed by all the games now that are going to get exponentially elevated.
Right.
And yeah, I don't think that diminished the game at all last year. The fact that
No.
both of them ended up getting back into the playoff, and
If it's a good enough rivalry, it doesn't matter. Like, just
yeah,
that hatred there
and just
is going
two
to exist.
elite football teams.
Right. Just elite indeed. I think it's going to be great. I know they got a ton to iron out with, losing an entire conference. That was, going to be beneficial to kind of a part of that. And it's very ironic that this new step would have been great for the Pac-12. I think it's great for the Big 12. Um, it's going to be interesting how just all of it plays out in the future regarding how they do it. But they've got to make sure that those conference championship games mean something. And I don't have a problem like Oklahoma State, if that's a 12-team field, wouldn't make it right now. Even if they weren't playing, so they wouldn't make it. I'm not saying they should. But hey, you win your conference championship game, they deserve to make
Deal.
it.
Yeah.
And so the team that gets knocked out, I'd say, should have played better. It's like the NCAA tournament. Maybe this a little higher stakes, but it's like the men's and women's basketball tournaments. A team that lost 12, 13 times in the regular season. Oh, how could they not get us in the tournament? Shouldn't have lost 13 times.
Yeah.
Maybe don't, like you had your shots. Like it's not like you lost once and they're not letting you in. Like you had your shots. So I don't know. I think it's good. I think the drama is going to be more interesting. And man, those, I think similar to that first year when they went to 4 teams and the excitement there was for the semifinal games and it was palpable. It's going to be the same next year. Those initial, first round games on those college sites are going to be just insanity.
Yeah. I think 12 is the perfect number, because I think 4 is fine, because if you are the best team in the country, you're going to make the top 4. I think that's been proven very, very effectively. But 12 feels like the most amount of teams where it doesn't diminish things. You can still incentivize winning your conference. You can still incentivize being one of the best teams in the country without watering it down so much. Because college football, I think, hands down, has the best regular season in all of sports in American sports. And I would go to war to defend that statement. One quick thing I'd like to add: I don't have a Big Ten podcast. Maybe someday. Seems like I got 100 of them now. But if I did, I would bring this up there. I think the Big Ten has an opportunity to do something really cool, and I don't think they're going to do it.
Okay.
Because what would diminish Michigan, Ohio State, without a doubt, is if they play that great game that we saw on Saturday, and then they line it back up and play for the Big Ten championship game on Saturday. That would diminish it. Having to see those two teams play back-to-back weeks. And there's a simple way to fix it that nobody's talked about. So I'm going to coin this trademark it. If it goes into existence, I would like a piece of the pie. All you have to do is delegate the final week of the regular season as rivalry week, or whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
Then just say these matchups are ineligible for the Big Ten championship game. And then boom. And also worth mentioning, with Washington, Ohio State, USC, and UCLA, it's going to be much harder for those two teams to just run through the conference like they've been running through it. But it does eliminate that risk of, they're 12-0, because then that game gets so diminished if they just run it back for more. For more,
and that might be a debate for another whole podcast, but that was something I've read about certain rivalries, like, and Michigan, Ohio State's the one we've discussed quite a bit here, so I'll keep with them. I've read that they've looked at potentially putting that game in mid-October, just so that there isn't like a back-to-back deal in case it's like a conference championship situation. I don't know if that's possible in a 18-team league, how that would even work, but there's a lot of things they've got to iron out.
Well, that's what's so cool about where we're at in college football is that you can do whatever you want. Like going into this year, you had 2 options: either get rid of divisions and have the 2 best teams play in the conference championship game, which would then allude to, a possibility of Michigan and Ohio State playing back-to-back weeks, or you have divisions and you end up with the ugly stepchild that is the Big Ten West, just to avoid having to play Michigan, Ohio State. The rules are off the table now. All these conferences are doing whatever they want. Some are looking at pods, some are looking at protected rivalries. The Big Ten has had protected rivalries, and then they're also being like, well, this team gets 3, this team gets 1 to keep that going. The Big 12 has almost no protected rivalries. So you can do whatever you want. That seems like a very easy rule to implement that would, bring in competitiveness that the Big Ten's current format with divisions doesn't lend itself to, without, the doomsday scenario of Michigan, Ohio State in back-to-back weeks.
You're right. Well, conferences, and they're going to have to. They're going to make those decisions going forward. But going to the future, you'll have the Big Ten at 18 teams, SEC at 16, Big 12 at 16, ACC in that 15, 16 range as well. So they can all do whatever they want schedule wise, but they're going to have to get creative. And if it gets too sloppy, maybe you just take a few teams and create another conference. Maybe that's more regional. But that's just one man's opinion.
A conference out on the West Coast.
Hey, just one man's opinion.
Pacific Sports Conference or something. Pacific Athletic League.
Man,
I don't know.
Yeah, Pacific Ocean is out there. I can confirm that. There is the.
It's easy to mix up because now Cal and Stanford.
Yeah,
they play on the Atlantic Coastal Conference.
We
should get one of those for the Pacific Coast.
I'll tell you what. Next time I'm out at Stanford, I'm going to have to get some water from the Atlantic Ocean and take it out there because that's nearby, right? Atlantic Ocean's close to.
I mean, they play in the same conference,
right? That's what it have to be, right? Definitely not closer to any other bodies of water. That's for sure. Shout out to my first grade geography education there. So I don't know. It's a complicated deal, but this weekend will be, a ton of fun, and still that doesn't take away from the entertainment. And but the committee's going to have some interesting decisions potentially, and decisions will have to be made. So we'll see what happens.
Now, the last thing I kind of wanted to get into is the coaching cycle in college football. It's also been bananas, I think. With first of all, I just want to throw out, I think Mark Stoops. Oh, so here's the thing with Texas A&M. If Mike Elko is a very good coach, I think that's exactly what they needed. There's a million good things about Mike Elko.
Yep.
I think that you could say the exact same things, but more about Mark Stoops. So it's crazy to me that they ran him out of town and then brought in Mike Elko. Feels like you're bringing in Mark Stoops light.
I don't disagree with that. I love that Texas A&M is getting roasted for multiple reasons. From their just beyond stupid traditions that just make no sense to me, and everybody rips to eternity with the 12th man and the weird midnight call and all that, to thinking they're larger than life. Like, I know they got a lot of money down there. They got some big donors, but you're not winning at all. And it's not like you're a program that historically has won. Like, the last national championship was, a long time ago. And they're not exactly a traditional power the last few years. They think they are. They're obviously paying like they are, so I guess kudos. But they're not. It's a very interesting hire. He has A&M connections, so I guess that does mean something with being a defensive coordinator under Jimbo. But, the lack of patience down there, I just hope that a lot of coaches across the country just kind of look around and realize, if you're going to go down there, make sure that buyout is a big one. Make sure it is ridiculously big. So it's an interesting hire, but they're clearly desperate and they want to wrap things up. And hey, just go get a coach from a traditional football power in Duke.
It's just it's just so uncanny that they went from a coach who has almost unanimously overachieved at a basketball school, wasn't good enough in the SEC, but then they hire a coach who is objectively overachieved at a basketball school in the ACC, and that's what they want for a lesser period of time, mind you. Um, so that's crazy to me. That it's just crazy because it's one thing if like they bring in Mark Stoops, they throw tomatoes at him, they don't want him, they send him back to Kentucky, and then they bring in a guy like uh, a flashy head coach. I thought it would have been funny if they would have gotten Coach Norvell from Florida State, Poach from Florida State,
Mm-hmm.
back-to-back hires, but they didn't. They just did. They said they got the same guy who just less accomplished.
I know, but that's, I mean, you never know how the coaching, carousel is going to go because you look, I mean, let's take a look at just the Big 12 coaching scenarios right now. Houston football gets rid of Dana Holgerson. They've fired him. They're in the midst of a coaching search right now. Brandon, you and I have talked about that a decent amount. There's been some interesting candidate names that have been thrown out from a Jeff Traylor at UTSA. We've read about a Cliff Kingsbury. There's been some interesting names. I even heard about the ghost of Kevin Sumlin by one radio commentator.
Wow.
And I was like, I don't see that one happening, but you never know. I mean,
I
life
would
is
bet
weird.
on that, but I love where they're looking. I think they're looking in the exact right place where they need to.
I literally had
Well, I
to do
guess if you're finding Kevin Sumlin in that bag of goodies, maybe not. But
I almost got
Cliff
an accident
Kingsbury,
on I-35. I had to do a triple take, and I was fogging out. I was crossing the lanes. People thought I was probably maybe had a potential DUI. No, I was just in a fog from hearing Kevin Sumlin's name.
yeah, I think we've seen
That's
enough
it.
of Kevin Sumlin.
I thought we did, but according to one, I won't name names. I really won't, but I did hear that. So, but Houston's an interesting deal, and I'm curious what kind of hire they can get with being in the Big 12. We'll see how that goes. Baylor's another one. You and I talked about Dave Arnetta quite a bit. We both thought he was done, and Baylor's giving him another year. And I'm still pretty surprised by that because they have had some pretty tough sledding the last couple of years down in Waco.
Yeah, my thing with Dave Aranda is that he's trending in the absolute opposite direction. Like it's
Yeah.
not like it's not even like he's plateauing. Where I feel like you can kind of make the case that a guy like Holgerson's kind of plateaued. He's kind of reached his ceiling and whatnot. Uh Aranda's gotten worse every year since that Big 12 championship, and there's just there's nothing that I see in that program and think they're just one piece away. They're getting better. They, you know, got jobbed in a couple of games. There's just nothing that I see there that's like, oh, I get it. I get it. I don't get it. He's run through coordinators. I think he's been through 4 in the last 6 years. I don't know why a quality coordinator would go there at this rate. Um, maybe they just don't. They genuinely don't want to dish out the buyout or whatever. But because a lot of these names that were thrown out for Houston, Cliff Kingsbury, Jeff Traylor, Willie Fritz at Tulane, maybe looking to make a jump up to the Power Five. It's funny because Jimbo Fisher's on this list I have in front of me for Houston, which feels ridiculous, but you got to have some fun. I mean, he could still collect his Texas A&M checks. So he could coach for free,
Fully guaranteed.
which
I
is
know.
insane. But still, he
Okay.
would still be one of the top 10 highest paid coaches taking a $0 salary. How does that sound? But
from a
nonetheless,
Houston standpoint, doesn't make sense, Brandon. But from a content standpoint, for you and me, imagine if we get Jimbo in this conference. I would personally. Here's how much I would be if Jimbo gets hired by Houston. Listen to me, Houston Athletics Department. You hire Jimbo Fisher. Brandon Shanahan and I will personally drive to Houston every year for one game as long as he is coach.
I thought you were going to go as far as season tickets, which I would have been on board with. They're probably like $75.
Do not tempt me with a good time. Do not tempt me with a good time.
And now
that's how far.
And that's also the thing that's so unique about Houston is that their program is just so empty at the moment, where you could probably buy season tickets for $75 a piece.
Yeah,
Baylor hasn't quite gotten there yet. they're knocking on the door. A few more years of 4 wins, they're there.
Yeah,
But you do need to make a kind of a splashy hire, which I feel like these guys all do that very well. And I think they'd also do a good job at Baylor. So if I'm Baylor, especially Jeff Traylor, my gosh, that seems like such a home run for either of these two teams.
that's true. It would make sense. And, for Baylor, they're four in the last 16 games, they're 4-12. And I mean, they're getting
Wow.
crushed. They're getting killed. Like 12 of those games were decided by 10 point or more than 10 points. So most of those games, they're not even competitive. It's not like close game. And they were competitive against West Virginia in their season finale. They almost found a way to win. And, that was a tale of if you started at the beginning of the year and you said who's on the hotter seat or who's going to get fired, I would have said, Coach Neil Brown. But credit to him, 8 wins. He's going to save his job. Should at West Virginia. He's put together a really nice year. But, there was only 39,000 people at that game at McLean Stadium, which was a season low. They went 1-6 at home this year. I can't envision a scenario where there's going to be more enthusiasm unless they do something crazy off season from a fan base standpoint. It's not the old days of college football where you can afford to have a couple of losing season. Fan bases and specifically donors are very impatient people these days. And those memories are extremely short term. And that's across all of sports. I'll pull one NFL reference this podcast. I never thought we'd live in a world where Bill Belichick is on the hot seat. I thought he'd always get, no matter how bad, even if he had a few bad seasons, he'd get to exit gracefully. And the Pats are bad this year, but he's probably not going to make it potentially, which is crazy to me. And it's always, what have you done for me lately? And it's why it's a surprising hire. And recruits are aware that coaches are in certain spots or on certain hot seats. And, if you're a kid, you kind of hope to play at the same place, I would think, for 4 years and play for the same coaches, hopefully, that recruited you out of high school. That's not the case most of the time these days, but it's why it's surprising because recruits, they're coming to Baylor. I mean, they've got to be fully aware if they have a bad season next year, I don't think he makes it.
You're absolutely right. Tough days ahead for those Texas schools. We got Texas school playing the Big 12 championship game. We'll talk about that later this week. It's the big one. I mean, is Texas back?
Ooh.
Who knows? It's one step to finding out. Any final thoughts here before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot to talk about in the upcoming episode, Brandon, with the game. Also, we got Big 12 awards we've got to talk about. They released those this week. So we got some big numbers. And hey, we got to give some shout out as well to some of these games from the last week. Because that man, Ollie Gordon, your Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year, was he torching and dominating in his game last week. So I can't wait to discuss some games and preview games coming up.